Hi, everybody. This is La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. My name is Ruben Mendive, and today I have a new writer for us all to listen to hear their story. So I always have my guests introduce themselves. So your name, how you identify, just a little snippet for the audience at home.
I'm Vicky Diaz Camacho. I consider myself a MEXI-RICAN journalist, and I'm from El Paso, born in California, raised in El Paso, so in that border city. I do a lot of work in the community, just reporting their stories, anything from art stuff to heavy feature news writing. So that's basically it. A bunch of stuff I do in between.
All right, perfect. And, I always start the podcast asking, the writer, where are you from? Just sort of what that means to you.
Yes. So there's a phrase I like to use, and a lot of us fronterizos and paseños, we use it. It's like from neither here nor there, because we're in, this city where it's a melting pot of cultures. I'm living in Kansas City right now, or Lawrence, Kansas, which is outside of Kansas City. So basically a Latina in the Midwest.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm from the Midwest too. I'm from Chicago, so.
Really? Oh my gosh. Yeah. I didn't know that.
So I do want to hear about your parents, what is their story?
So my family, I would say, is very interesting, very many layers. Basically, my parents were both horse jockeys, and so I myself am 4'11". I've never reached 5 feet, so I'm very short. But I only know my mom, and she's always loved horses and training them, and so I was raised kind of in this environment where I was in the rural areas, and then my grandparents raised me proper. So they took us to school, gave us shelter, all of that. I would say my family also has struggled with mental issues, kind of a thing throughout my life that I've understood early on, even when I was 5 years old. So I understand the need to talk about it and understand it, and also self-care. So people would make fun of me all the time when I was a kid, saying that I was kind of like a mom, and I've always been that person to take care of others, be there for my sister. We have a super strong bond. We're 10 months apart. So just understanding that family is very, very important, but it can also be toxic. So it's good to have boundaries, set your boundaries, and understand when you can be around them and when you need space for yourself.
Yeah. And how did your mom get into being a jockey?
So she has always loved animals. I would say we always see cat ladies. My mom is an animal lady. She loves all animals. She has 2 ferrets right now, 3 dogs. She at one point had 3 cats. And I remember one of my gifts when I was a kid was a duck. Who gives their child a duck? But yeah, early on, she loved animals. My grandpa would take her to, zoos, and then she got into equestrian riding. So she would show horses and then got into the racing. I think it was the adrenaline, and we're open about this. So my mother is bipolar, and I think that adrenaline rush of racing, that really, really soothes her. It's very cathartic. And she loves to train as well. So, always writing. And my grandparents were the opposite of that. They were super into, I don't know, just fancy dinners and all of that. Super mid-century, I'd say.
And so tell me about, your childhood, growing up. I always ask people, who were you? Who were you pretending to be? How did other people see you?
As a child, I would say I was a little bit more quiet and observer. I say that is very much how I am today, except that my job requires me to go out and talk to people. So that helps me get past that social anxiety. Like talking to a stranger is very difficult for me. But as a kid, I was very creative, loved to just be with my sister. We would sing together. Um, we were often playing outdoors. I mean, my grandparents had a very lively environment whenever they had fellow Puerto Ricans over. So they had a
Mm-hmm.
very tight group. My grandpa just retired in El Paso. He just loved El Paso because it was bilingual. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of home, the warmth, being able to be around other people and speak your native language was very important to him, I think. And now I understand that, whereas before I didn't. Um, but I would say our childhood was very warm and cold at the same time
Mm-hmm.
because my grandmother, I think, also struggled with either depression or maybe even bipolar that went undiagnosed, but I'm not sure because she would have these moments where she would yell at us, or it was not violent; it was more emotionally abusive in
Mm-hmm.
that. So I was very protective of my sister. So I remember feeling like I'm safe because I have a house, but it was very unpredictable knowing what was going to happen next. You know, if my grandma was going to get
Yeah.
upset, you know. So that was
Yeah.
how I learned not to trust people, I would say. So I'm very wary of people, and if they seem like they're on edge, I don't know. I'm just very careful.
So I do want to ask about, this, like you said you were MEXI-RICAN, is that right? So what's your like been experience? What has been your experience of that? How did those two sort of, how do they like meet at you, you know?
So El Paso is very much on the Juarez and Texas border, right? So we were in a city that was majority Hispanic, and from what I understood was the Mexican culture was very prevalent in our city. But my house was very Puerto Rican. I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking, paintings and little mementos that they would bring back with them. We had the hats, the straw hats that said Puerto Rico on it. Um, and the food during the holidays was very much Puerto Rican.
Mm-hmm.
So, people would make coquito or we would have mofongo, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Little things like that, I would always, I loved it. I loved my habichuelas. I loved my arroz con pollo, whatever. But my Thanksgiving was very different from everybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So, kids talk. And what did you do for Thanksgiving? And this and that. I went to my cousin's house and we ate this. You know, there was a sort of divide because in my school, I don't think there were a lot of Puerto Ricans, maybe not even one. It was just me. Um, and it was a pretty diverse school. There were a lot of, Mexican kids, white kids, people from all sorts of backgrounds. But I think my husband Polo, he says it's like your Puerto Rican side is more prevalent than the Mexican side of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just learned to embrace both
Yeah.
as I've grown older. And I love both cultures. El Paso has taught me so much about two commonalities, which is music. Um, I think that we express ourselves through art and music in beautiful ways, particularly in the past week, with the El Paso shooting. Um, there was one song my grandfather always used to ask, and he's Puerto Rican. Or see, my grandfather would always sing this song, and he's Puerto Rican, and that's Amor Eterno. So when the news started circulating about Amor Eterno being kind of the anthem for people who were lost, there was a fusion there. It
Yeah.
kind of did the dots for me.
Yeah. And how would you describe, El Paso when you were growing up? Like for people that have never been, or especially don't know what it's like to live at the border, like because you hear so much about it on the news. So what was the reality when you were growing up and now?
Yeah, El Paso is it's buzzing with, excitement. I would say that as a child, I do remember we'd always go to swap meets. Um, and those I loved because you have a collection of almost anything or just really fun shirts that, with like hand painted things on it. I don't know how to describe those, but it was a combo of Mexico and America, that, you know, you just saw it. It was right there. It was palpable. You know, also the food, it is incredible because it's Northern Mexican cooking and then El Paso's interpretation of that.
Yeah.
So I just always remember being able to have the option. Do you want French toast or do you want like a chile relleno burrito? Right? That's the beauty of border cities is you get both. I also would say El Paso is such a hot place. It's just it's desert. And I remember complaining about the dirt because we get dust storms all the time. And it would get into my teeth and my eyes. And that was always what I would complain about as a kid. Because, I mean, you can't go outside for PE and play in the dirt, you know. So, you know, just coming to terms with that, getting stickers in my feet, you know, they hurt so bad because it's desert weather.
I did want to ask about, you know, how do like I've never really heard about like Puerto Ricans and like El Paso. Like, how did that come about?
I know that is it's like going from a tropical place to this desert space.
Yeah.
It's very weird. What specifically are you wanting to learn about?
Well, how did your like Puerto Rican side of the family end up there?
My grandfather was born in Santurce, in Puerto Rico, and he and my grandmother met during med school or during school. And so he was, it's basically that story of poor guy meets rich girl type of deal.
Yeah.
He was not supposed to be in med school. If you were to look at his life, he was in poverty, you know, his family had a lot of struggles mentally, physically, and then somehow his community rallied together and pitched in to get him a bus ticket, make sure that he would go to classes. Slowly but surely, he got his degree. My grandmother was his mentor. She would draw she would draw anatomy so that he could learn it because it was difficult. But they graduated, they got married in 59 and left the States, or left Puerto Rico for this. And he was in Germany for a while, went to San Francisco, I think Pennsylvania. But there was something about El Paso that he absolutely loved. I really believe it was that warmth and that sense of welcoming that all the El Pasoans typically have. There's something to be said about how El Paso embraces the stranger, no matter who you are, where you come from. And yes, there are definite, you know, there are different beliefs, different religions, different politics, but that still doesn't take away from the kindness that you experience from every El Pasoan. And we often, my husband and I often get that when we're in the Midwest. Like, oh, y'all are so nice. I think that I attribute that definitely to my grandpa because he was so chill and so nice. Would talk your ear off. It doesn't matter if you were a server or, you know, if you were a patient, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and what about the like Mexican side of your family? Like what was their story to like, you know, to like end up in El Paso?
I call him my bio dad because I don't know him. But from what I have heard, from the stories that my mother has told me, they owned their own restaurant and they're from California. So I assume they're all there in California. But that's all I know, that they owned a restaurant. My dad was a jockey for a long time, a pretty well-known guy at that point, and very successful. But other than that, it's like he's floating somewhere. Maybe I'll one day.
Yeah. And so I want to get into like you as in high school. Like what was that experience like for you? You know, what were you passionate about?
In high school, I wore many, many hats, but I also played sports. I was a cheerleader. I did volleyball for a while. But I do remember always wanting to have friends. And that was a struggle for me, I will say. I would have good friends here and there, but I will be honest, I don't feel like I always fit in. And that may have been attributed to my upbringing and being in a home where, you know, your guardians are much, much older than everybody else's parents,
Mhm.
you know? And they also shared a lot with me about the struggles that they were having with my mother. And knowing that as a teen is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because that's at the back of your mind, and you're
Mhm.
thinking, oh my gosh, my mom isn't like their mom, you know? So I
Yeah.
think some sort of divide. In fact, I made friends with the librarian, with the nursery school teacher. I was like friends with all of the
Yeah.
because I could connect with them. They had experienced life, and I had too.
Yeah. And so, what did you do after high school?
After high school, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. In fact, I skipped my graduation. They had a party after grad, so I walked the aisle, you
Mhm.
know, got my degree, and then I was like, peace out, because I didn't connect with anybody at that point. I
Yeah.
had a couple friends, but after high school, I just looked for a job, honestly. I didn't know what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to college. My grandparents at that point were getting older and quite apathetic. It was hard for them to give me any advice on next
Yeah.
steps, you know, because they had done that. They'd been there, done that. So I went and worked at a car dealership for, I would say, 2 years maybe. And it was a just awful job for me because I was not passionate about that. And the type of person that I am, when I'm passionate about something, I'm in there 200%. But when it came to being at the car dealership and being the receptionist, welcoming people, that was not cool.
Yeah.
So high school, 3 years, 3 years of my life kind of wasted. And I don't say it's wasted because it just set me up for what came next. And that was one night, midnight, I thought I'm just going to apply to college and see, you know, if I can get in. And I applied to New Mexico State University, and I was able to get enrolled and started all these classes. It was incredible because the very first class I took, it was kind of an elective course,
Mhm.
and it was Journalism 101. And I'm fairly shy, I would say, at first.
Mhm.
And when I was in class, they were asking, you know, what did you read? What do you know about the news today? I raised my hand and I spoke up, which is bizarre. Like, that's opposite of what I would do in any class, in any
Mhm.
situation. But I felt as though this was the place I needed to be. You know,
Mhm.
I care about people being equipped with the information that they need to make an informed decision. You know, and I've
Yeah.
always been straight. My grandfather would laugh. He's like, "You're such a director. You're such a boss. You know, you want to make sure things are okay." Immediately, I threw myself into documentary photography, journalism classes here and there, and that all kind of brought up a flood of memories as a kid where I was writing every single thing that happened to me, every single friend that I wanted, you know?
Yeah.
So ever since I was a kid, I had journal upon journal upon journal.
And why did you pick New Mexico?
That's a really good question. I think that I wanted to feel like I was away. And I wasn't always an advocate, like not an advocate. I didn't always embrace my city.
Mhm.
So I went to Mexico State because it felt like home away from home, kind of. The people were different. I thought it was really pretty, and I love Las Cruces. It's super charming. I love thrifting too, and there's a lot of vintage shops over there.
Mhm.
So there's one that I would hit up called, I think it's La Vieja, and it's a pretty rundown place. Like, there's a bunch of really cool stuff. I don't know if I can curse, so I'm just thinking about it.
You
I don't
can.
want to. Um, and she had a lot of like old school fringe, like leather jackets and boots, and so that's how I started. That's another hobby of mine, is kind of fashion and putting that all
Oh,
together. It's a creative expression of who I am, which I think I'm an amalgamation of, you know, posh spice and sporty spice, and then a little
okay.
bit of Southwest in there.
um, And did you end up getting your degree in journalism?
I did. So that's another interesting. I've had a lot of pivot moments in my life because New
Mm-hmm.
Mexico State, I believe at that time, lost accreditation for the journalism program. So I had to pivot real quick. And at that point, I was about to get married, and my fiance at the time, Polo, he was applying to graduate school, and that was to KU. So he had applied to
Mm-hmm.
KU, so I applied to their program, and we both got in. So it was a perfect happenstance moment there. We both got into the school, and had to move to the Midwest.
And how are you liking the Midwest? Well, what has it been like to move to a different city?
That was so hard. I have come to terms with that the first 2 years I was completely depressed because
Mm-hmm.
I am a busybody. I like to go places and check things out. For 2 years, I was on the couch, just by
Mm-hmm.
myself, hanging out with my husband. We did explore here and there, but little by little, I think I learned to open up to people in the Midwest. I made a couple friends there, but here's the funny thing: a lot of friends that I've made are from California or Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bunch of people who are now transplanted in a new city. Um, I love that I work in Kansas City, though. So Lawrence is college town, where KU is, and I work at the Kansas City PBX over there in Kansas City. Um, and that's a really vibrant community, I would say. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's growing quite a bit, and slowly but surely, I've also been able to connect with fellow Latinos. I felt more aware of who I was until I moved. That was a
Yeah.
weird feeling.
Yeah, talk about that. What's it like to be a Latinx person in the Midwest? What has been your experience of that?
I'm a very proud Latina, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And even in high school, I'd be like, yeah, I'm Puerto Rican. Yeah, I'm Mexican. I
Mm-hmm.
was very straight forthcoming with that identity. Um, when I was in the Midwest, I felt like I needed to, tone it down a little bit, not, blast my music. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I love listening to all sorts of stuff, like Julieta Venegas or Bad Bunny or Cardi B, very loud and proud, and I love that. But I felt like I needed to be quiet, and that was sad for me. I think in part it had to do with I experienced some very strange, like, oh my gosh, you're a Latina, you speak Spanish? Tell me about that, instead of, you're Vicky, tell me your story. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's very tokenizing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even first job out of college was awful because I would be stopped in the hall and say, oh, what's your full name? Can you tell it to me, but like the right way in Spanish?
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah.
very weird. And I don't think that was okay because there's a lot there that I never thought was bad. And when I talked to folks, it seemed pretty unethical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a thing that there are Latinx people in the Midwest. I'm from Chicago. We have a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Puerto Ricans there. Um, but it's also a big city. So
Right.
there's a difference between, Chicago and Kansas City and um, and sort of do you know the demographics of racial wise in the city?
Yeah. So Kansas City, there's two sides of Kansas City. There's Kansas City,
Hmm.
Missouri, Kansas.
Hmm.
KC, no. Missouri side, 10% Hispanic or Latinx.
Hmm.
Um, Kansas side, 30%.
Hmm.
So it's a bit of a larger
Yeah.
community. That explains why I like to go to the restaurants in KCK because
Hmm.
I'm able to get my chile relleno and all that stuff, and I also feel very, very welcomed
Hmm.
into that space.
Yeah.
There's more of a hesitance, I would say. Uh, Maybe it's people noticing that I'm strange to the city, you know?
Hmm.
When I first moved to Lawrence, it wasn't as like, oh my gosh, hey, what's up? What's your story? I want to talk to you. You're getting coffee. You seem new. None of that. it was just very cold and dry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so can you talk about like what you did after once you graduated, once you got your degree, like like your experience with, just in general and also with journalism.
Let's see. Throughout college, became an editor for the college paper,
Mm-hmm.
which I think set me up for the next few years because it's a very good college paper. I started out as a copy editor, then reporter, became arts editor, and then editor in chief, which is super cool. I did not believe in myself because I had mega imposter syndrome. Yet I was still taking these steps to, oh my gosh, I'm taking these strides into adulthood, into the workforce. Um, so after college, I applied to the only job I found, and that was in advertising, which is the opposite of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a copy editor and a copywriter. And throughout that experience is where, I think that the pressure really refined me in the sense that I understood, oh, this is not what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Have a greater idea of what I want to do, and that is to serve people, help people, inform people, not manipulate. And there's no, I'm trying, I don't want to offend anyone in the advertising field.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's very hard. It was hard for me. It was very difficult. But it was also a very toxic environment at that time. That place that I was at, people pretty much pigeonholed me as the only Latina in their office. And I came on as a copy editor, copywriter, and they changed my title basically to do Hispanic marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I had conversations with them about that. I said that I am not the spokesperson for the whole community because it is extremely diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So, it could be anything from age to background to being, an interracial Latino couple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't just assume that I know. So that was my experience there. But there was a saving grace in that I got to intern at NPR 3 months into this bad job. So I escaped for a few months. I got to be in DC at NPR and work on the arts and books desk, which was amazing. There, like, that's what fostered my love for public media and basically set me up for what I'm doing today as a community reporter. But I had to hit a few road bumps, right? A lot of learning curves. And I even went to a really great job. It was a business journal, but it was a little too businessy for me because I'm more of a creative.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do things that aren't in the box, and I don't like to be behind a computer 8 to 5 every day. I like to be out talking to people now. So now I'm at the Kansas City PBS station where I'm reaching into communities, just hanging out with them, doing interviews. I did one with the Queer Eye. I don't know if you've watched Queer Eye this season, but Diana Munoz was basically the only Latina I think that they interviewed.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so I got to talk to her and learn her experiences, and through all of that, I'm making friends.
And I do want to ask, like, what did you learn at NPR that, like, sort of fueled the things that you did after?
I learned the importance of listening. I didn't ever think about that in terms of, so when I interview people, I used to write a list of questions, and that was it, and I would just read it off and not really connect with that person. The NPR producers and editors that I worked with taught me how to do that, but that was just by example because I got to shadow them. And it was cool because I got to see different types of journalists. So one of them, Bob Mondello, does all of the movie reviews, but the way that he does it is incredible. He tries to understand how it relates to the people now, to the times now, and does all sorts of stuff like that. It's stuff that we think, oh, this isn't worthwhile pursuing, yet they do it, and then you're excited to read it, excited to listen to the stories. And there are two mentors that I absolutely, I mean, they helped me so much. Elizabeth Blair, she basically said, you want to tag along to the Kennedy Center award show or whatever? I'm pretty sure that's not the name, but Kennedy Centers, and just to see everybody in action and the empathy that each and every single journalist there had, so cool. Because, yeah, we don't attribute empathy with interviews all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
But empathy is the one thing that I really got out of there, and also understanding that as public media journalists, that we have a stake in someone's journey to learning, right? And I'm excited about that. So it was really hard to go to anything else, to any other job, because I think I had a purpose.
Yeah, and I want to know, like, where did the writing start for you? You know, like, were you always writing? Is it just something you discovered? Like, can you tell us about that?
I was the child that always wrote notes. I didn't want to tell you anything. I wanted to write a note to you and say, don't do this, or can you please do this? And then I had, like I said earlier, I had journals just filled with anecdotes from my life. And I do remember I always took in the world. It was a very sensory experience for me, which meant smells mattered, the feeling, like humidity, or, it could have been the arid climate that I was in. Everything in my life was very tactile, but then I would put that into words and put that on a page. And that was cool. So ever since I was little, I have been writing to communicate my thoughts. I say that often that I communicate best through writing than I do in speech. I took speech classes in college. That was just not my thing.
Yeah. And were you known for writing? Like, did your teachers notice it? Is it something that, like, you were encouraged to pursue?
I was the person on MySpace and Facebook that would write a lot. Yeah. I had notes. I am not a good poet at all, but I took creative writing classes, and most of what I wrote about was my life and my family, because I don't know, I observed early on my guardians, or they're basically my parent figures, getting older, so I wanted to understand what that was like. My stuff on Facebook, there are a few notes that I wrote, poems about my grandmother as she's battling dementia and Alzheimer's, or my grandfather and his reactions to seeing the love of his life basically deteriorate. It's also therapy. Writing is therapy for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you interviewed the Latina that was on Queer Eye. So what other stuff have you been working on recently that you are passionate about? And even stuff that you noticed that you're like, why isn't anybody talking about this?
I noticed that just like my identity, I feel like has been amplified, so has my attention to the Latinx community. Especially in Kansas City, because I feel like a lot of us feel very isolated. We live in neighborhoods that don't look like us. We go to stores where we're the minority there, looking for ingredients for meals that remind us of home, yet it's not there, right? And so that brings me to my point, right? Just understanding that there are other identities here that aren't being discussed in a positive light. So for me, when I'm reporting on communities, it's not to find the bad and the dirty and the ugly. It's to find understanding and common ground. One project in particular I absolutely loved because it expanded beyond the original story. And it was understanding Islam in Kansas City. And, with very polarized views, we don't have the opportunity to talk to other people. I was raised in a home where my grandfather pretty much discriminated against a certain group of people for their religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And though he was a beautiful human, that was not okay. So in my work, I'm trying to bridge those gaps. And so I did in that story, and that was Understanding Islam in Kansas City, where we brought a Protestant woman, and she was able to ask questions to an imam
Mm-hmm.
in the city, and they had a conversation. And what that illuminated was a commonality in certain religious views,
Mm-hmm.
in certain texts, and and through that we were able to make this social media segment about understanding. And we released one just recently on our social media page. Let's debunk these myths about hijabs and about being oppressed. Talk about your experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and that is beautiful to me.
Yeah, I there's this new show on Hulu. It's called Rami.
Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, and I think it spoke to me like sort of like how you were talking about the work you've been doing, where you see like you see into a world you're not really familiar with, and you come across with all the commonalities you share. Like
Yeah.
and yeah, and I think that that's an important thing because when we think about representation, it's not just like TV characters and movie and films about our experience, but it's also about like the work you do. It's about the real, not just representation within the journalist, but also the representation that those journalists can provide
Exactly.
through the reporting they do.
It's important. I think there's stories that are missed because there's not maybe a Latina in your newsroom or a Muslim woman
Mm-hmm.
in your newsroom. Like, we're missing a bunch of really important conversations that need to be had. And I'm only one person, and
Yeah.
I at least want to start something where I am, and hopefully, I don't know, I'm hoping to start a ripple effect. But I do see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even like this, because the New York Times or other like newsrooms will come under fire when they've sort of said something or written something that's a little tone deaf. And the number one conversation that comes up is like, it's like, well, this speaks to the diversity in their newsroom, like if it's all the same kind of people, you're going to get the same kind of view. And that shapes the media and the news and information we're ingesting. But, it comes up a lot when there's like these little like snafus by media organizations, but I don't know if there's anything actually being done about it.
I think they try, right? I know that there are diversity efforts, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure if I don't know if they're working. I mean, there was a recent. I don't know if you read this. Lulu Navarro from NPR wrote a piece in the Atlantic, basically saying the media wiped out Latinos from the conversation during the shooting, right? In the media coverage.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because it's not as apparent to them the effects of a shooting that's targeted to a certain community.
Mm-hmm.
So the history there is very important because that was one of the biggest, attacks against Hispanics in the. They are trying with that diversity efforts. I've seen local newsrooms try to do this in Kansas City. Every single person should understand that the communities that you're interviewing, you need to diversify among your sources, among your experts, right?
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've been thinking about that too, just in the sense of, this podcast and how the people I'm talking to, sometimes they'll do other podcasts and I'll hear
Yeah.
like a different host who doesn't share like the Latinx identity, and there's something to be said about just the innate familiarity and touchstones culturally that we have that I notice the conversations are very different. Like a guest will tell me like, well, I just did this podcast, and I'll listen to that, and I'm like, well, we don't really cover the same stuff. You know, there's a difference with, you know, who you're speaking to and what you already have in common that you know, somebody of a different race or gender might not even know to ask. You know, just because it has never occurred to them to ask that, or they don't have their own personal experience from it.
Right.
So yeah, I think it is important to like diversify, and I think you're right. You know, the coverage of El Paso. I don't know if it's hurt. I don't know if I've read the hurt through major news organizations that I've felt. You know.
Right. That's the thing. Local orgs have been pretty good about it
Mhm.
because they're boots on the ground. They're
Yeah.
talking to people. They're hanging out with them. Um, it's also very traumatizing because these journalists who live in El Paso working on the stories, they don't have an
Mhm.
escape. They're going back home,
Yeah.
you know, thinking about this and wondering if it's going to happen again
Yeah.
here, you know. Um, so again, there's that point. We need to learn more empathy of understanding that other communities are going to feel a certain way, and don't disregard that as we're, you know, trying to write racially based stories, because no, it's they're people's stories.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a really good point. You know. Yeah, the like Latinx reporters covering this El Paso shooting, targeting Latinx people, have to then go back to their homes and think, oh, is this going to happen to us? Am I in danger? Um,
Yeah.
so you know, you mentioned that you're in El Paso now.
Yes.
So, so is there a reason you came back to visit? Is there besides the shooting? And what have you like seen just from like being there?
It was actually supposed to be a surprise visit.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna my husband and I were gonna visit his mom for her birthday,
Mm-hmm.
and we got these tickets probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it was before anything happened. But I'll be honest, I was very tired because we've been traveling a lot. In the past 6 months, it's been an emotional roller coaster for me because my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather recently passed. So just planning all of that, being with him, saying goodbye, and then doing the memorial. Then we realized, oh my gosh, the shooting happened. What better time to be there than now? Because we have to be with family. In fact, my mother-in-law was on her way to that exact Walmart at that exact same time. And she was singing. She's just this wonderful, like, happy person that likes to sing. And that made me think that we would have been not celebrating her birthday. We would have been celebrating her life. And that's just horrific.
Yeah.
So I'm super grateful that we get to be here. But I don't know. I feel as though it's not as busy. And Friday night is typically buzzing. Like people are out having
Mm-hmm.
fun, drinking, whatever they do. It didn't seem as packed, and that it just breaks my heart because we're such a cheerful city. Um, but the beautiful side to the other coin, you know, the other side of the coin is that you see so many flowers and dedications, and I'm sure you've seen the photos.
Mm-hmm.
it's it's growing. People have these little memorials right next to the Walmart. um, I mean, what can you do in
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a state of shock other than go visit the place where someone that you love was killed, and just try to heal, try to be with someone that you love. um, but yeah, I intend fully on celebrating life and just being with my mother-in-law because she's also a good friend of mine. So
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky that we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, you mentioned to me that you were sort of working on a project that would sort of tie in, the mental health effects of that this sort of, tragedy can have. So if you want to like just talk about it.
Right. So I've done research over the past few years, just interested, by myself,
Mm-hmm.
wondering why when it comes to mental health, the Latinx community, at least my own bubble, we don't go out and seek help and get therapists to help us go through trauma or anything like that. And I mean, the data is staggering because if you compare that to the white population, I think these numbers are probably wrong, but about 60% get help, whereas the Latinx population is 20 to 30% get help. That was really saddening to me because we're not caring for ourselves. Mental health is a big deal. You know, we work hard and we play hard, but what about caring for yourself when, you know, you hit those lows? When something traumatic happens, you can't just buck up and, you know, wipe your tears and keep going, because I don't think that's healthy. I do that is the problem. Whenever there's an issue, I'm just like, I don't have time to cry. I don't have time to grieve. I've got to keep going. And throughout the years, I've noticed that by suppressing those emotions and by not caring for my mental health, I was becoming very irritable and even further anxious and depressed. So I'm not enjoying life when I should be.
Yeah.
And so this project would be kind of an inward look at the Latinx community and see how we can learn how to cope after the trauma, after you've been targeted. And I'm super excited. Hopefully it'll be a documentary. But basically I hope to illuminate that there is hope out there for the Latinx community in Kansas City and in El Paso. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And, you know, I think you bring up an interesting point that you know, with, you know, mental health issues and also the reporting of this, you know, shooting, that this is different. Like you sort of bring into question the intersectionality of it. You know, like a school shooting is traumatizing for the community, for students, for the people's families, for other students in other schools. But also, what does it feel like to, you know, the trauma of someone targeting your specific racial group, you know, being motivated by a presidential, like, or the president, and also having the other thing that it's like the numbers of people that seek help in general are low, and like what happens when you have this sort of trauma sort of on a community. Like there's so many more layers that like this isn't just like another shooting. This is like, it's a hate crime. It's like more traumatizing. It's like to different degrees that different groups experience it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to explain the complicated emotions I have right now with people who are not Latinx and asking me like, "Oh, are you okay? Like, how are you feeling?" I don't know. I don't know how to feel. But you definitely feel like there's a big spotlight on you and that somebody hates you just because of the color of your skin or just because you just so happen to be Mexican or Puerto Rican, whatever. And that is definitely because they hate. That hate is so, it's just a toxic poison, you know? Yeah. It breaks my heart that anybody would hate another person for their race or religion. And that's why I'm doing the work that I do, because I want to debunk all of those myths. Yeah. I know you can't change people's minds, but you can make a difference, at least a little bit, through education.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's why I think it's like important, the work you're doing through, you know, like news media, because we, you know, when we talk about representation in like film and television, we're talking about how there's very little Latinx people and overwhelmingly white people, and the language it's used. But it's the same thing for like quote unquote some news organizations that use rhetoric that like spurs on people that commit these like hate crimes. You know, you know, it's been the last couple of days, a lot of things have been pointed out, like news organizations saying invasion and like all these like dog whistles that
Right.
this person themselves uses, and that's not like a TV show or movie. That's like a news organization and publications and blogs using this language. So that I like that you're on the completely opposite end, trying to just like open up the view of Latinx people and other people,
Mm-hmm.
and educate, because I don't think a lot of education's going on.
No, we need to stop sensationalizing all of this, all of the things that are happening today. That's a big problem. And also, language matters. So,
Mm-hmm.
headlines you read, people are influenced by those, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I was actually trained in copy editing. So, when we would have to write all of those headlines, I thought, oh, come on. Like, what? It's no big deal. No, it really is. Because obviously, the word invasion infiltrated someone's mind. And they thought, oh, this is really happening without even considering. So, like I said, education is super important, Hopefully we can make a difference.
Yeah. So I did want to ask about writers that you admire. So heroes of yours, peers, anybody whose work you see out there that you're like sort of like a fan of, just if you want to shout out some people that, you admire.
Absolutely. So, I have a few people. Obed Manuel, he's at Dallas Morning News. Good friend, wonderful reporter. He actually is an immigration reporter. Just an all-around good human. Shout out to him. And then one of my role models is Shireen Marisol Mirage, and she's with the Code Switch podcast.
Mm-hmm.
She was the reason why I thought I need to be proud of being MEXI-RICAN. You know what I mean? Because at first I thought I had to choose one, but she's a proud Puerto Rican. So being a journalist and, Puerto Rican, super cool. And man, she's just so smart. There's a bunch of other people. Oh, Maria Hinojosa. Maria Hinojosa from Latino USA is doing wonders with her work. I mean, she is bold. That's another thing is we can't lose the pride and how bold we are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we need to just amp it up a little bit further. Like it's time to be brown, loud, and proud.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's always interesting because some people have like a certain insecurity at their Latinx identity. Like you mentioned in El Paso, it's like ni de aquí, ni de allá, and then with the MEXI-RICAN, like me being from Chicago, I know a lot of MEXI-RICANs. Yeah, but then I think we're sort of started to expand the different nationalities that we can be, because I think we've sort of a little bit expanded out to Afro Latinx, but there's also like Asian Latinx. There's also like there's so many different mixes, and I hope those people would reach out because I'm thinking maybe like if you as a like MEXI-RICAN person still has insecurities about certain what you can claim or not, like I can't imagine what somebody else. At least like you have two like Latinx identities. And if you're having trouble with it, I can't imagine with somebody that maybe just has one half of them. So I always like to end the episode by asking the writers to title their episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So in that blank, you can add more than one word. You can change them around, just whatever you feel like embodies you, your story, the conversation we've had, or just whatever comes to mind.
Like I'm proud of my hoops, so I'm always a hoop wearing MEXI-RICAN Latinx writer.
That works.
Okay.
I feel like a lot of people are going to identify with that.
Hell yes. That is. I mean, I was all about J-Lo when I was a kid, so that's my deal.
Yeah, and that's why I like sort of like to put up these titles because I want other writers who like maybe are going through similar stuff. If they see someone that identifies like they do, then they'll listen and sort of learn and connect and build community from that.
That's so cool. I'm super excited. I'm grateful for what you're doing. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
well, thank you. I'm great. I'm like super fascinated with all the work you're doing. Oh, and can you let people know where to find you, your social media?
Yes. So on Twitter, you can find me at Vicky D_C. And I'm also on Insta, same handle, Vicky D_C. I'm also on Facebook, but I think Insta and Twitter is a good spot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So now they'll know where to check you out, follow your stuff.
Yes.
So I do want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was a great conversation. I feel like I learned so much. So to all our listeners, thank you so much for listening. You can follow us at La Lista Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. And we'll see you next week with a whole new episode. All right. Bye, everybody.